in the Allies Book Club, part of the BIPOC STEM network, which was developed to enable staff to educate themselves on anti-racism and how to become better allies. The work ties in with the broader divisional and cross-divisional work on race equality, including the Race Equality Task Force, which is going to report the outcomes of their consultations and recommendations to the university on Tuesday, the 19th of October, next week. We really would like to thank our sponsors for today's talk, and that's the National Institute for Health Research, NIHR, Oxford Biomedical Research Centre. The NIHR Oxford BRC is a collaboration between the University of Oxford and Oxford University Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust to fund world-class medical research. The BRC is committed to supporting and promoting equality, diversity and inclusion, and they're one of a small number of organisations currently taking part in an NIHR initiative to assess their delivery of race equality in health research. They've also created the Diversity in Research Patient and Public Involvement Group to critically assess their work, but recognising there's still more to do. We work towards meaningful equality and inclusion. They're delighted to sponsor this event and believe that Patrick will catalyse some important conversations in the field. So, Dr. Patrick Vernon has enjoyed a very successful career as a health activist, social commentator and cultural historian. Working across both the public and private sectors, Patrick has developed and managed services including social care, mental health, public health, cultural heritage, employment and regeneration. He's currently chair of the Citizens Partnership for the Health Safety Investigation Branch, Associate Director for Connected Communities for the Centre for Ageing Better, and the Director of Every Generation Media. He's a leading expert on African genealogy in the UK and campaigns passionately about Windrush. Patrick has formerly been an Associate Fellow of the Department of History of Medicine for Warwick University, and he's also committed his time as an advisor on equality and diversity for Lambeth and Harrow Councils, among other responsibilities as the first Director of Black Thrive and the Director of the Camden and Islington Mental Health Foundation. Highly commended throughout his career, he was appointed an OBE and Pioneer of the Nation for Cultural History by the Queen. He has also claimed an honorary PhD from Warwick University and has been awarded the National Campaigner Award in 2019. He's acted as the independent non-executive director of Birmingham and Solihull Integrated Care System and the non-executive director of the Hertfordshire NHS Trust. And in 2020, he established the Majonzi Fund to support members of the Black community suffering due to COVID-19. We are absolutely thrilled to welcome Patrick today, and that's enough from me. Over to you, Patrick. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and great to meet everyone. And yeah, it's really great that we're having this conversation in the middle of halfway through Black History Month. I'm doing quite a few events covering different aspects of Black British history. But my day job, or what I've done for many years, I've always worked in health and care. Going back, look at my career working for Mind back in the 1990s when I was a regional director supporting local mind groups developing the community services, day centres, supported housing schemes, etc. So it's really great to talk to you and maybe do some provocations about what we could do next. As you know, the murder of George Floyd and combined with the pandemic that we're still experiencing has thrown up big questions in society, not simply about how history is taught or how we commemorate history, or issues around injustice around stop and search, and the pandemic itself and how it's disproportionately affected Black and minoritized communities. It also raises big issues around the type of healthcare that we want. And recently, sorry, I'm going to stretch here. I was asked to write in Fabian Society. This just came out about a week ago. It's called Prescription for Fairness, Remedying Health Inequalities in a Post-COVID Era. And I've actually written a chapter in here about the voice of citizens and the voice of communities as part of the process of co-production. If there's one thing that we must learn as a result of the pandemic, is that we can't sideline the lived experiences of patients and communities. They have to be part of the engine to working with clinicians, researchers, academics, commissioners, and politicians around designing a healthcare system and also tackling health inequalities. This also applies to you guys. researchers. I know that peer research has been in vogue for the last several years. Some of you have tried to train people from the community to be researchers, but this is taking it to the next level about them being part of the co-production process around what type of research is needed, how that research is developed, how that research is commissioned, and how do you assess the impact of that research. I think, personally speaking, and in particular my new role as non-exec director of Birmingham Science ICS, as you know, there'll be 44 ICSs which will have a key role around commissioning health services, working with providers of healthcare, working in partnership with local governments and wider communities. And research is going to be a key element of that work. So, so one of the key things, I'm really keen that researchers work closely with us to improve quality outcomes of services as well. But when it comes in terms of, particularly in the context of Black History Month and the Black experience, I'm talking particularly around the African Caribbean experience. I think there's other considerations that we need to explore. One of those considerations, I think, is the history of discrimination, which often is never really factored into government policy or research work. As you know, we had the Commission on Race and Ethnicities report led by Tony Saul that came out March this year. And I think the health section is probably the worst section in the report. And I'm sure some of you have read that section of the report. I've been on panels and I've challenged that with people that won the commission. And some of them turned around and said to me, well, you know, obviously Tony's experts in education, yeah, but who were the health people that you talked to? Did they talk to you? Did you give evidence? And it's probably one of the most woeful parts of that report, how it tries to, and its recommendation was, we need to do more research work and we need to do reforms and stuff like that. Yeah, but I mean, we've had a long history of reforms. There was nothing in there that was groundbreaking as well. I mean, obviously, you've got the Race and Health Observatory, which was launched about a year ago now, and that's their recent infographics that some of you may have seen or contributed to highlights the growing inequalities around a whole range of indicators around mental health, diabetes, chronic heart disease, stroke, etc. But one of the key things when looking at health inequalities work and research work, which is often combined, I'm just reflecting my experience. I spent 18 months, probably about 2 years, in the Department of Health around about 2000, 2003, 2004, when the government launched the very first health inequality strategy called Programme for Action. I was part of that civil service team. And I'd been working for NHS by that time. I was a director of the Health Action Zone. If you can remember Health Action Zones, and I was director for one in Brent, and I was then seconded to the Department of Health because we were quite a successful Health Action Zone. We were doing creative ways of commissioning healthcare around mental health, around chronic heart disease. We've got diabetic nurses working directly in the community. We're doing some really interesting, innovative stuff. And we spent a lot of money on research and evaluation. So I was brought in as part of the civil service team, working with civil servants at developing strategy. I'm trying to bring some realism, some hands-on experience from the ground, from the work I was doing as director of Health Action Zone. And if you look at health inequalities policy, we did it then, and even far back in the Black Report and going forward, the history of discrimination is never ever considered or factored into health research or into inequalities thinking. And I think that needs to change, especially in the context of Black Lives Matter. That was further reinforced by the Saul report, didn't really acknowledge that at all. And I think one of the things that we need to really explore, definitely from a Black perspective, Black diaspora perspective, is which has been happening in America for the last 20, 30 years in terms of research work on the impacts of enslavement, Jim Crow, structural racism. A lot of work done by Professor Williams at Harvard University, and the whole notion of using weathering to a whole range of factors to describe the impact of racism on the Black body, Black and brown bodies. We need to do that kind of research work here in the UK. And the question is, why aren't we doing this research work that acknowledges that racism, even though we know racism is a social construct, but the impact of racism and the impact of policies, as well as other factors around lifestyle, further compounds people's health inequalities. You know, I've done a lot of work around mental health as well. So I think there's a history that we need to look at. We need to look at the history of empire. And this is important because the history of empire still has its reverberations today around how people are trained, how people see people like myself, other people with Black and minoritized experience communities, how the medical profession, how it was established, and particularly around the lingering aspects of racism in reflecting some of the diagnoses, particularly around psychiatry and mental health. It's still there. We have to recognise war and conflict has an impact on people's experiences. You know, people who have left war-torn countries to try and seek a better life, and the psychological impact on people. We have to recognise that the history of people like Galton, the eugenics movement, is still there. It's still influencing indirectly how eugenics is used to try and still justify the whole kind of bell curve scenario, you know, about around intelligence, IQ. That is still lingering around in research thinking, sadly. And if you look at roll it forward in terms of more recent impacts of discrimination, such as immigration policy. I was heavily involved campaigning for the winner scandal, but if you look at the hostile environment policy, and something I've done petitions I've written about, it's not been taken seriously, and maybe something that maybe you as researchers should help to do some research work, that the psychological impact of the hostile environment policy, where you're using fear to force people to then, which is reflected in how people have lost their jobs, been deported, threatened with deportation, that the post-traumatic stress of the hostile environment policy and Windrush scandal has had a major impact on the Windrush generation directly, as well as their children, even their grandchildren, because it raised that vexed issue around, are you British? Are you British enough? Do you belong here? We don't really want you here. These subliminal messages, directly and indirectly, has impact on people's psyche. It's no coincidence that over 20 people have died in the last couple of years who are still waiting for compensation from the Windrush compensation scheme. And some of those cases I know personally because I've actually worked with some of the families. They have died of stress-related illnesses. That stress has come from the hostile environment policy, the uncertainty, the unknowing of how they've been treated by the Home Office and by the government. And I don't know why don't know why no one's not picked on this in the research community to look at the physical. I mean, and not understood how people have died is other people. I think it's reducing people's life expectancy, and it has an impact on people's mortality. You know, I would love to work with a group of researchers working with some of the Windrushes and to assess their physical and mental health and how a social engineer policy has had a direct impact on people's health well-being. You know, so that's something that I think we need to look at. It's like the impact on the black body and the black mind. We have to recognise, again, through the history, the whole stuff around stop and search. There's been a lot of research work being done, particularly in Canada and America, less so here, about the impact of being stop and search on a regular basis. It has an impact on your well-being and your mental well-being, where you are stopped constantly, and it raises those questions again about not just simply about civil liberties and whether you're guilty or not. It raises the whole stuff. It's no different to what was happening during the time of the height of slavery, where people that was the experience basically. You weren't allowed to go anywhere because you were property of a landowner or a plantation owner. So you only could stay within the grounds of the plantation unless you had a special license or you were allowed to travel. That's the impact of stop and search now. So there's no research work on the psychological impact of stop and search. And there are lots of guys I know from the 80s when stop and search was pretty prominent to write to young people now. Generations have passed on those lived experiences of being stopped and searched. And the way that you've been stopped and searched, I've been stopped and searched, it's one of the most dehumanizing experiences you can experience. And I think the average people, the average public don't understand that. So I think that's something that we need to look at. I think, there's lots of work that needs to be done, but one of the key things that I like to explore with you, one of the reasons why, by the way, we established Black History Month, started in America in 1926 by Carl C. Woodson, only the third African-American person to get a PhD. And he started that because the whole idea of Negro History Week was at the height of Jim Crow, where every day black men were being lynched in the Deep South. There was segregation. You weren't allowed to share the same spaces and opportunities as white Americans. And he believed that if you could educate, inform about racial pride, that will help black people, African American people, to be proud of themselves. Because, we've been told about 300 years that you have no history, you're not worthy, we're doing you a favor, we're civilizing you. Far from the truth. If you look at the history of the world, look at the great civilizations, all came from Africa. The Nile Valley, the Kush Empire, all these things are there, but we've never been told that history. I was never taught history at school. It's only been when I left university, and I started on a personal journey of discovery to find out all this history that we had, but we've not been told about this. So Negro History Week was established in 1926. It wasn't until 1987 that Black History Month was established here in the UK. And one of the reasons why it's established in the UK, again, was to give racial pride, because again, in Britain, during that time, post the Brixton uprisings, post mass unemployment that was happening during that time, again, we were told that black people did not contribute. It's been a long journey for people to now understand that we contributed at the Battle of Waterloo, First World War, Second World War, and obviously modern day conflicts. We've contributed on different levels, and it's just been part of that journey about our own history and our own Black British identity to do this. And ironically, in a place like working for the NHS, when the Empire Windrush stopped in Tilbury, 6 weeks before the establishment of the NHS, we have been there from the very beginning of the NHS. And you'd think by now, we'd have more black people working at senior level, as chief execs, medical directors, directors of nursing. We've been there, we've been in it for the last 70 odd years, but we've still got a long way to go on that. So I think one of the key issues again around research work is to look at research work on identity, racial pride, and how that can contribute to people's self-esteem, confidence building. I think that's another area of that should be considered and looked at as well. I just read an article yesterday where a number of black academics working in the field of science were being interviewed, and they talk about the racism and discrimination that they face in career opportunities and working in academia, when they're working in biochemistry, geology, whatever it was. They felt that they weren't given opportunities to get research grants, and the way that the research grants prefaced in terms of the brief didn't reflect or didn't give the opportunity to explore some of the things I've identified. And I think, personally speaking, I'd love to see the various research council bodies, I know some of them are starting this process already, to be quite honest, to really flip the question, to look at researching more work around structural racism. I know the government hates this. I know you might be threatened by the government saying we're not going to give you the money, but that is the only way. We've spent too much time, too much money, too much thinking in trying to put us in little boxes without looking at the box itself. We need to do more research on the box and the impact on the box as individuals, as communities, as citizens, as opposed to looking at all our time, looking at us that we're the problem. And therefore you're the problem because you can't fit into the box. The box is a problem. The box is based on blood of the history of this country, and that's not been, and it's not been acknowledged. Apart from, in 2006 when Tony Blair made a statement of regrets around Britain's involvement in the slave trade. But apart from that, we have not gone through a process which happened in South Africa because of apartheid, of reconciliation. May have not met all the key outcomes, maybe as Desmond Tutu, who turned 90 this week, or the late Nelson Mandela, but at least they're starting to go through a process. In America, they're starting an element of that process around conversations. But in Britain, we feel so scared and stymied not to even have a dialogue to explore the impact of history on this country, and therefore it has an impact on healthcare, how we see healthcare, how we design healthcare as well. So I'm very keen to explore in the Q&A what more we can do. I think there's one of the key things, which again, there's not much research work being done, is the impact of community trauma. Often the research work is done on individual trauma, and that's important. So if we've been abused, if you've been in the care system, etc., etc. But learning from the lessons of Hillsborough, Grenfell, and now the Windrush scandal, I think more work needs to be looked at around community trauma and how you can develop better services around healing to tackle community trauma. We don't do community trauma. I don't know why. Other parts of the world do it. Even Australia does it, and New Zealand does it. But we don't look at community trauma in the way of a system approach, in terms of the wider ecosystem of healthcare delivery, basically. Communities are traumatized for a whole variety of reasons, basically, but often we still have a linear analog thinking around community trauma. So I think more work needs to be done on that. And then the big question linked to that is about who is making these decisions about research grants, who's making the decisions about the kind of development of commissioning of the research grants, and who's making the decisions around awarding contracts. And on the other side, those research teams, are those teams diverse enough, not just in terms of technical expertise and diversity of thought, but representation, and do they allow people to put forward ideas and suggestions which could be engaging or different to add value to the thinking of a research delivery. So these are kind of some big questions that we need to explore. I hope that university and NHS working together can start to look at this and have a real brave approach. Again, this is already happening in America. They are now seriously looking at impacts of systemic racism in healthcare. We need to do the same thing here in the UK. Otherwise, we'll be reinventing the same old solutions, and the outcomes have not improved. If you can give me evidence of better health outcomes around how Black people are treated around diabetes care, coronary heart disease care, mental health care, based on current thinking, I'll shut up. But I can't see the evidence, so please convince me. I'll stop there for the time being, but happy to have a dialogue conversation.
Patrick, thank you very much. I'm just going to turn on my video. I hope. Yep, is that working? Yeah, great. Okay. Thank you very much, Patrick. That was an incredibly insightful overview, actually, of what's happening at the moment in the healthcare research arena, and actually, from my point of view, has brought up a lot of questions that I'd like to kind of debate with you, and see what your thoughts are. And there will be questions coming through as well on VVox that I'll pass on to you. Yeah. But if you don't mind, if I just kick off with a couple of questions. So I understood that you're asking why are we not doing research where the impact of racism or structural racism is measured on health, so the impact that it has on health.
Yeah.
Why is that not being done? And I think that's a very, very good question. What I would ask you is a slightly tricky one, which is, in research, we like to measure things. So we can certainly measure the impact of something on health, but how do you measure racism, and how do you measure structural racism?
Well, I mean, I'm not a scientist, so I'm sure some people might have better answers than I have. But again, there have been a lot of work done in America which have started the process of doing this. So there have been some research work, and particularly in the context of policing, where they've measured how people have been, how, you know, different kind of cohorts of people, how they respond to police officers, or the fear of crime. So there've been examples of that kind of research work, which is a proxy. I mean, the things like there isn't. I can't. I mean, what you're describing, how they measure structural racism, is more of a political question than a scientific question, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
You know, in many ways. And it would be a conversation at that level, basically. I mean, if you look at current legislation, we have the best equality legislation in Europe. Well, when we were part of Europe, and but we've never implemented it fully, to be quite honest. So this is the irony of it. And but there are, I mean, equality impact assessments, even though it's not a perfect science, is a good proxy. So we've got some proxies that we could build on, but we have not invested the thinking to answer your question, for me to answer that question. I mean, the classic example is prior to 1965, you know, no one could travel to the moon and walk on the moon. But people, so if that's a question, we want to get to the moon, people put energies and resources to make that happen. So that's the comparison I would make.
Very, very good.